right. Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all. If you are new to our meeting, I am Rabbi Devorah Lynn. I'm co-chair of Jewish Earth Alliance and here with Mirla Goldsmith. And we have this meeting every month on the third Tuesday of the month, unless it's a Jewish holiday or a holiday, I guess. We have the wonderful confluence on Thursday of Purim and St. Patrick's Day. I'm always amused when that happens. I want to welcome anyone who is new to our meeting, and it's great to see you and our regulars as well. So this is a really auspicious time that we're in this week, of course, a lot on our mind. Just as we're taking off our masks, we're celebrating putting on masks for Purim. And the Purim story practically tells the story of the war in Ukraine. I mean, it's pretty astonishing what the Purim story has to say to us on today. For centuries, Ukraine was a center for both Jewish suffering and enlightenment. So our agenda tonight, we will start off with an inspiration, and then we'll have a briefing from our lobby week, which was at the beginning of March, and our speaker tonight, a Q&A after he has spoken, and we'll have some closing words. So that will be our agenda tonight. So let me start with our inspiration. Janna Diamond is a somatic practitioner working at the intersection of trauma healing, embodiment, and the climate crisis. Her work focuses on supporting people to cultivate inner resources for collective evolution. Janna has a private therapeutic practice and leads groups on navigating climate emotions, most recently for Extinction Rebellion, Yale University. Those two are quite a contrast in one sentence. The Hive Cincinnati and faith-based organizations, including Hazon, Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, and Congregation Bet Havarim in Atlanta. Janna is a member of the Climate Psychology Alliance and serves on the board of the Northeast Work That Reconnects Hub. So Janna, welcome very much for, thank you very much for leading us in this inspiration.
Thank you for that beautiful intro. And I hope what I've cooked up could be considered inspiration. I know just gathering together can be inspiring enough in these days. So thank you for having me. Thank you for all your good and courageous work through the Jewish Earth Alliance, through all the things that you're doing. I feel inspired by you. So I'll say that. And I do have the honor of getting to support people not only to work through challenging personal experiences, but also to consider the environmental, the global, the collective pieces. I'm going to move my video back so I'm not spotlit, so I can actually see all of you. And especially as it relates to climate. So that was all just shared. And tonight I imagine that many of you here are being deeply affected by the climate crisis, by the situation in Ukraine. Imagining a number of us have ancestral roots in the area and may feel that deep pull and the existential threat that these pose. And I just want to say we're often feeling a lot more than we can metabolize in our body systems at any given moment, and that's okay. It's actually really, really needed to be only able to take in little amounts at a time. So as we also gather tonight, right, in Adar 2 on the cusp of spring, where kind of buds, I actually took a photo this morning. I was on my walk, these beautiful buds, where everything's getting ready to kind of emerge into its fullest or fuller expression of what's been percolating just underneath the surface what's been ruminating, what's perhaps been hidden, right, beneath the masks as we mask and unmask in these days. I just really want to question, like, what might a healthy personal and collective expression of these times be, right? If we are individual expressions of the whole, what is it? What piece of the puzzle are you holding, or are you here to feel or express? So I'd love to take a moment here for you just to consider your inner state, what you might be holding just beneath your soil. Right, whatever you're feeling in this moment is right and valid. And perhaps noticing how your body is doing, if there's tightness, if you're carrying stress in any particular area. And sometimes we're so overloaded that it's hard to feel or know what's happening, and that's okay too. In fact, we've devised really wise ways to defend ourselves from feeling all the things that we don't want to feel. Except this also keeps us from feeling our joy, love, and connection. Right? So when we defend against the pain and the heartbreak, we also defend against our fuller range of expression, our aliveness, our heart. And so if you're open to it and if it feels okay, I want to encourage us to go ahead and bring our hands together and maybe give them a good little rub. I'm going to exhale, and maybe you want to too, creating some friction, some heat. When we start moving, this emotion helps to metabolize and integrate the information, our experience. And we don't even have to know exactly what it is. So as we bring that to a close, see how it would feel to go ahead. Again, this is all optional, to interlace your fingers together and bring your thumbs together. This kind of creates a little bit of a surface area, and I'm going to gently tap on my sternum here. So if this feels available to you, right, as we bring in the body, maybe there's some audible exhales or sighs that might want to come with it. Most of you are muted, so you can make as much sound, and maybe I'll make a little bit for us. Right, our inner experience is actually a significant piece of the picture here. Taking action, creating healthy ecosystems, which I hear is the theme for tonight. Healthy democracy, right?
Come on.
Good. And then we're going to do one other piece here. And so you're going to bring those hands back together, rub them one more time. And then if this place is accessible, maybe it's just one side at a time. If I'm going to lean a little bit forward, and I'm going to bring my hands to my lower back, my kidneys. And I'm just going to give a little rub here. And again, exhaling, which I Right, connecting to two places that the body often likes to defend or keep things hidden from us. Kidneys known for storing some fear. So if that's resonant for you, just take an exhale. Good. Yeah. And then you can release those hands, shake it all out. Let that go ahead and drop. Maybe take a look around the room and see who's here, who's showing up, who's alive at the same time you are, who's doing this collective work. Yeah. So may we continue to connect to what's hidden, allowing and calling on our fullest expression for deepest connection, care, and truth in these days. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Janna. I wanted to write in the chat anger and heartbreak, but after moving a bit, after sitting in front of a screen all day long and moving a bit, I feel a lot better. I feel a lot better that we're here to act, to do something, and to get good feedback for it. So thank you so much. Thank you for that different aspect of tapping into who we are as activists. Thanks so much. Okay, so 2 weeks ago we had lobby week, and let me get my notes. I lost them. There we go. Two weeks ago, we had lobby week, and we encouraged you to meet with staffers from the office of your members of Congress or the members of Congress if possible. And many of you did. It was pretty successful, and you have and many, or those of you who didn't get a chance last week, you've got a meeting that's scheduled and coming up. So we're very proud of you all for going after that. And we want to have a few people report from those meetings to encourage you further. And I want to call on Judy Burlfine first from our Southern California partner. Judy, could you say, I saw you a minute ago. There you are. There you are. Could you say a few words, a couple sentences about how your meeting went and organizing them?
Okay, well, I'm going to let everyone know how many meetings we had. I haven't had my meeting yet.
Oh, great.
So we had all around, you have scheduled 7 meetings, 4 with senators, 3 with representatives. That's from Maryland, Georgia, California, and Pennsylvania. So thank you to all of you, Amy and Joanna and Carol and Phyllis for setting those up. And now you can go to people who already had their meetings and you can tell how they went.
All right. So Joanna isn't on the call yet, I don't think. Is that right? Yeah.
But Phyllis is here.
But Phyllis is here. Phyllis Blumberg is very active in Jewish Earth Alliance, the Environmental Defense Fund, and Interfaith Power in the Light of Pennsylvania. And you had a meeting with Senator Toomey. Is that right, Phyllis?
Yep, that's right.
Oh boy.
Senator Toomey, as we all know, is not a staunch conservative conservationist. In fact, he prides himself on being a conservative man. He believes that the government should stick out of everything that has to do with regulation and helping industries or anything like that. So we knew it would be not like meeting with our friends. But it was a group of people who've been writing to him for years. So we feel like we could take a little liberties and tell him our thoughts. So a couple of tips on getting the meeting organized. And I think this is true for everybody, not just the Republicans or the people who are not really our friends. It really takes perseverance to get it organized. I emailed, I called the local office, I called the DC office, and then I emailed and I called. It was kind of like wash, rinse, and repeat repeatedly. And I bugged them and I bugged them and bugged them until finally I think they said, all right, let this lady, have her meeting. And he offered me 20 minutes and he gave us a half an hour up front. So I thought that was very generous. One thing we learned is that we're not necessarily writing to the right person, because the person we met with is not the person that is on the name of the cover letter that we're sending it to. So I think it's probably important for all of us to check who the new person is who's in charge of environment and energy issues. And probably our letters this month might even go to a different person than the people that we are normally writing to, because it's a slightly different topic. And I also think it's important that that script that Marilla gave me was really helpful. It helped me to make it Pennsylvania specific, but it gave me a specific way of organizing, and that really helped the members. People who are doing this for the first time are intimidated by doing this. It's kind of like it's going to the Holy of Holies almost. So people don't want to be doing it. So we had a mix of veterans who've met with people in the past and some new people. And I think that's a really good way of doing it. And people who felt they couldn't do anything, didn't have anything to say, they did the thank yous, they did the, the sort of the real easy type of things. And then those of us who felt we had more of a voice, got our voices in there. We had a rehearsal, which is essential. We assigned people specific roles and statements to make, and that really worked well. And then we pushed on the issue that Marilla pushed us on. Methane was a gone cause. There was no way he was going to budge on that one. But we pushed him on the wildlife one, and the concern, we met with an aide, we did not meet with Toomey. Where's the money coming from? It's all fiscal when it comes to him. And he would follow up about it, but he's very concerned that we don't have money to restore the habitat. And we then sent a follow-up email with a whole bunch of resources on the environment and on wildlife preservation, and coming from a variety of sources. So at least they might pay attention to it. He did say he reads all of our letters very seriously, and he's the one who responds to our letters. So he said, he thanked us a lot of times for talking. So all in all, I would say it was a good meeting. He was respectful, but it was clear they were not making much progress.
Right. Well, we want to send our kudos to you for having the chutzpah to show up for that one, because it's so difficult. But and it's important to have bodies or really windows there of people who don't say anything, right? That people can just be there with you and you don't have to say anything if they're shy. So let's give Phyllis a hand on being chutzpahdik, having the courage to make the phone calls. And
can I ask her a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I'm trying to set up a meeting with a very unfriendly congresswoman. How often did you make those requests?
I would say every other day.
Oh, okay. I need to step it up.
Yeah, because in the beginning I was polite and I just made it once a week and that type of stuff. And and the other thing that I think really helped is he said, I think it's good to give him or her suggestions on when you can meet, as opposed to having them do it, because that way they're sort of forced to look at their calendars as opposed to, well, anytime. But I mean, I had it on my calendar for like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would say.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I'm sure we've all heard over and over that persistence is a great virtue, and that sometimes people will meet with you just because you're so annoying. Yeah, as Rabbi Aidan Steinsaltz said, that's the
Yeah.
character of the Jewish people. We're annoying. We stay up all night and we ask tough questions. So that pays off. It pays off.
Well, Carol Singer succeeded in getting a meeting with her, so something worked.
Right. There you go. There you go. Okay. Well, thank you all for that. And those who haven't had a chance to do it, get your courage up to make those calls and share the burden of calling every other day if you have to, but in many cases not. Muriel is saying kudos on getting the staffers' attention for the wildlife bill. That could make a huge difference. And we found that the staffers, if they're hired well, they have a lot of background and they know what they're talking about, and they're very interested in hearing our voice. They want to hear from us. So give yourself that self-esteem that they want to hear from us. So thank you all for working on that, and we'll continue to work on scheduling meetings across the country. And congratulations to those who have already had the opportunity to do that. So now I have the honor of introducing this evening's speaker. Dr. Andrew Rosenberg received his PhD in biology from Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada. He previously served as the chief scientist at Conservation International. He was the Dean of Life Sciences at the University of New Hampshire and the Deputy Director of the U.S. National Marine Fisheries Service in NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Dr. Rosenberg was also the leading author of the Oceans chapter of the U.S. National Climate Assessment and a lead author for the UN World Ocean Assessment. He is now the director of the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and he has more than 30 years of experience in the intersection between science and policy making. And that's the second time I've used that word, intersection, of two various modalities. I think it's been changed to intersectionality in some ways recently. So Dr. Rosenberg, please give us your wisdom on one of our three priorities for this year, a healthy democracy.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi, and hello to all of you. You may ask why you're listening to a marine ecologist talk about voting rights and democracy reform, and that's a fair question. In fact, within the Union of Concerned Scientists, where I've been for 10 years now, we initially didn't work on any issues related to democracy reform. It's something that I started within the Center for Science and Democracy because it's very clear that we can't advance on any of the priorities that Union of Concerned Scientists works on unless we actually can strengthen the infrastructure for our democracy, including voting rights and fair representation, and the functioning of the three branches of government. And there are challenges in all of them. So when I joined Union of Concerned Scientists, there was an old joke running around that said, the name doesn't make sense. You're not a union. You don't have to be a scientist to join, and nobody knows what you're concerned about. But other than that, it's a great name. And one of the founders of UCS is a very well-respected physicist named Kurt Godfrey, whose family fled from Vienna just before the Second World War. And he stood up and he said, well, I know what I'm concerned about, and the name is staying. So UCS was formed in 1969 by Kurt and several other physicists who were concerned about the role of nuclear weapons, the missile defense program, and the Vietnam War and they felt in the confines of a university, they couldn't say what they felt needed to be said as physicists, as university faculty, mostly from MIT, Harvard, and Cornell. MIT, had very large grants from the Defense Department. So did Harvard. So did Cornell. So they stepped out into Kendall Square and started doing teach-ins in the 1960s style. And that's where UCS came from. So we, unlike most science societies, are unabashedly an advocacy group. We believe that there's no conflict between being a good scientist and being an advocate and activist, just in the same way as there is no conflict. In fact, there's great synergy between your Jewish faith and being an activist. And the Kurt and UCS as a whole decided to form this Center for Science and Democracy 10 years ago. And the question was, so what is a Center for Science and Democracy? That was the, I was hired on and they said, do it your way. What do you think we should be doing? Which is a dream job in many ways for somebody like me. And we often thought, the science part is easy. We can work on science policy and how science comes into public policy in a sort of inside the Beltway, Washington kind of way. What is much harder is to figure out the democracy component, because many scientists, and unfortunately many citizens, don't see themselves as part of democratic process except when they vote. Sometimes they vote every year, hopefully. Sometimes they vote every 2 years or 4 years or whatever it might be. And that's what they view as the democratic responsibility, which is unfortunately way too limited. So we work with the science community and those who support the idea that we should have policies based on scientific evidence, not only on political spin, we work with those scientists to advocate and do the things you just talked about, going and meeting with your members of Congress, either in the state or in DC. How do you do that? How do you do it effectively? How do you write for your local paper? Because, maybe older scientists would say it's far more important to be in the national papers like the New York Times or the Washington Post, but those have no longer been those are no longer trusted voices for a lot of the country. So writing in a local paper can be just as important. It's much more the case now that it is someone that's your neighbor, or on some parent of someone in your child's class or someone in your congregation, where you're likely to receive messages and think about things slightly differently than if you hear it from experts on cable news. And so we try to encourage that amongst our scientists. Unfortunately, a few years ago, we made a connection with some political scientists to think about the science of elections and the science of voting rights. And that became incredibly important, of course, following the 2016 election. I can say, if it was any positive thing that came out of the Trump administration, is no one ever asked me again what I was concerned about. That's probably about it. That's the sum total of positive that I can say out of the Trump administration. But all of a sudden, everyone realized that we weren't trying to raise issues of science-based policymaking just because we wanted somebody to listen to us and only us. So I did an interview about that time, actually, for Al Jazeera America when it still existed. And the reporter asked me a question no one has ever asked me before. And that question was, why does it matter that science is a basis for policymaking? And I had no warning the question was coming, and it was on camera. And I said, because if you don't have science as a basis for public policy, then all that's left is political opinion. Because you have no set of facts that can be independently tested. You have lots of beliefs, but you have no facts that can be independently tested. You have no constraints on the political decisions that will be made about what policies to take. And I actually, I'm pretty happy with that answer now. That is in fact where I think we are. So let me now turn to the democracy work that we have now been doing for about 6 years. And clearly, the access to the ballot is a critical issue in many, many communities. Not a critical issue for me. It's probably not a critical issue for most of you. You can drive down the street or take public transportation or whatever you do. You can vote fairly quickly. You're unlikely to be challenged at your voting place. But of course, that's not the case for many communities across the United States. In fact, there is what I like to think of as a wall, and voting rights groups try to help people every election get over that wall. But the problem is there shouldn't be a wall there in the first place. Why should somebody have to climb a wall to go and struggle to go and vote? Why should communities, particularly poor communities, but most especially communities of color, struggle to have rules for voting that actually work for them, such that it is as easy to vote as it is in many countries, and certainly for many of us in this country? And why are all the election materials only targeted at so-called high propensity voters, when actually if you were thinking about it economically, you'd say, well, every time I can get somebody who's not a high propensity voter to become a high propensity voter, that's probably the most worthwhile from a democratic perspective, not Democratic Party, but in terms of healthy democracy. So a very interesting thing happened in 2020. Most of the focus was on safe elections in times of a pandemic. And a lot more people voted because all of a sudden we had drop boxes, we had extended voting hours, we had all of the things that should happen. It still was not a fair election system in the sense of access to voting. And the fact that if you removed many of those barriers that were there, a whole lot of more people would vote, I think scared a lot of conservative voices and certainly the Republican Party. So we had an enormous tsunami then of voting restriction bills to remove all of those facilities that made it easier. In response, of course, as this group knows well, the For the People Act was created. The Freedom to Vote, which is now the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act was created with good progress in the House, passed in the House, but really no prospect in the Senate. And that, at least as far as I'm concerned, is a democratic crisis. Because if you look at the provisions in the bill, either of those bills, there's nothing in there that you could say is in any sense, revolutionary, radical, or startling. It is things like extended voting hours. It still leaves all the control in the states, etc. But it has no path forward in the Senate. And that's where we, Union Concerned Scientists, are part of the Declaration for American Democracy Coalition, which is about 230 organizations that, everything from science organizations to the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And it's hard to see any path possible in the Senate right now, because it's not just Senator Manchin that will stand in the way, but to pass either bill will require at least suspension of the filibuster, and there's no prospect of that with Senator Sinema and Manchin both indicating opposition. Many people are wondering why President Biden doesn't do something, and that's because it's not within his power to do something about passing those bills, although you could take some action in the executive branch. But with at times a quite hostile judiciary, particularly the Supreme Court, it's unlikely to actually affect the national landscape. So what is in those bills that's so frightening? It is extended voting hours. It's all about voter registration, eligibility, access, fair representation, and election security. The Republican answer, of course, is the Electoral Count Act, which has nothing to do with any of those things. And is just really a trivial in one sense. I mean, it's fine to pass the Electoral Count Act. It doesn't do any harm, but it does no real good in terms of overcoming voter suppression. So once again, we will come up on an election where there is a barrier, there's a wall for many communities. And the only option is to try to help people get over that wall once again, with extraordinary efforts to try to help those who don't have easy access to voting and who don't see the value of voting. And where does that happen? That happens at a community level, at a congregational level. For example, we have very good partners in Ohio, in Cleveland, in the Greater Cleveland Council of Churches, which is both churches and synagogues, who do what can be referred to as deep organizing or relational organizing. I don't know if any of you know those congregations personally, but essentially that means that members from the various groups in the Greater Cleveland Council of Churches are working with their congregations directly as organizers in the community, and they're not parachuting in for just one opportunity to talk to people about why they should vote for a particular candidate. They're there, they live there, they see each other every week, if not every day. That's what's meant by relational or deep organizing. And that is, I believe, actually the route for solving some of the issues about the very low voter participation that we have, and helping people over a wall that still exists in places like Cleveland, certainly in Houston, certainly in every large city in the country, in Atlanta, and so on. So while we're continuing to push at the national level, we also are trying to find ways that, as a group of scientists, a union of scientists, even though all of us are not scientists, we can support those efforts for community organizers to actually provide greater access to the ballot. So what does that look like? Well, it doesn't mean that I'm flying to Cleveland and walking door to door. What it means is that Mike Ladner and I and others in our group, we try to provide real-time data to the on-the-ground organizers. We call every precinct office. We find out how many ballots have been sent out. We find out how many ballots have been returned. We find out how many ballots have been rejected and what the reasons for rejections were. And then we go back to people whose ballot was rejected and say, you can resubmit. You can, in the last election, 20,000 ballots were rejected because it's set up in the corner in the fine print, you need to put your birth date on the ballot. Not entirely clear why, if you were already registered, but they just rejected the ballots and people didn't know what to do. But we had those data and we could go door to door and say, just enter your birthday here. It's not, people didn't enter it, not because they don't know their birthday. They didn't enter it because they didn't realize they had to, because the instructions were confusing. People in Houston now, their ballots are getting rejected because who can remember what document you used when you first registered to vote for the very first time? Well, you can go and help get that information. They have a huge rejection rate for absentee ballots in Houston, like 50%. And most of that is because you have to submit the information from the identification that you used the very first time you registered, even if that was 20 years ago or 30 years ago, which is, designed to be an impossible hurdle. But you can get that information and go back to people and say, well, what was it? Was it an identification card? Was it a driver's license? You can also go back to the office. Now, the Texas law says the election workers are not allowed to help people. They actually are not allowed to answer questions. They're not allowed to help people cure their ballots, but we're under no such restriction. So there are efforts that might not be in your community, but are probably in communities near you. There are on-the-ground organizations that are taking efforts to try to help people climb over the walls that have been put in place, despite the many, I think it's 44 bills that have been created. And it's not simply get out the vote. It's trying to actually create elected officials that are responsible to the electorate. I want to touch on redistricting a little bit. The same thing is true with regard to congressional and state legislative districting. That is in the hands of state legislatures. So what do state legislatures, Democratic or Republican controlled, doesn't really matter. What do? Their goals are to protect incumbency and to maintain party control, neither of which are elements in any state constitution. Actually, if you do a scientific analysis, which we are working with people who've done, you can draw the districts in many, many ways to address issues like fairness, like racial balance, like rural urban divide, and so on, all of which do address some of the issues that are part of constitutional mandates. But the only places it works to challenge those things is if you can bring a successful lawsuit in time for the elections itself. And there are some states where that's possible. So far, we've been successful in North Carolina and in Pennsylvania, and are probably going to be successful in Ohio and likely in Louisiana in rejecting the gerrymandered maps from the state legislatures or from a governor's office. And that moves us towards fairer representation. So I guess, so that I don't go on too long here, there's one other thing I'd like to say that I think is critically important about voting rights, and that is it's not only important in presidential years, it's not only important in congressional years, it is actually a local process. That's the way the system is set up, for good or ill. Without the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, local control will still almost totally dominate election process. So actually having people who will be in place in state government at all level, and sometimes even in municipal governments, that will actually take the job of fair elections seriously, take the job of public policy that serves all constituents seriously, is critically important. And that doesn't happen only every 2 years or every 4 years. You can clearly see that many conservative interests, and I would say extreme conservative interests, have gotten that message. That's why there is a concerted misinformation campaign in school board meetings. It's why there's a concerted and well-funded misinformation campaign in election board meetings. These are well-funded disinformation campaigns that are strategic. They use the same strategies that have been used by the tobacco industry, by the oil industry, by the food industry, by political interests for many years. In many of the school board meetings, the people you see screaming are paid actors. That's also true in the election board meetings. All that needs to be successful is nobody to actually respond and just say, I can't put up with this, I'm just gonna let them do whatever they want. So this is a very, very fraught political time. It's a fraught political time globally. Our focus is on domestic policy, which is not to dismiss the concerns in many places around the world, including, of course, Ukraine. Other programs at UCS do work on issues like global security and so on, but my program is domestic. We have to ask whether we actually believe that our democracy will survive direct assaults. And I don't think that that's an overstatement. Some have called it an overstatement. I don't think it is an overstatement. We are asking in this decade whether our democracy will survive in some recognizable form
Mhm.
that actually follows democratic principles. And I'll take any questions you might have. I hope that was
Yeah,
helpful.
I was going to say, let's see, I have two questions on the chat so far. One from Judy Burlfine. Don't these issues impact Republicans as well as Democrats?
They do, but the calculus, the political calculus is that if you can suppress the votes of particularly community, Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, many of those voters will vote Democratic with a capital D now. And so from a Republican perspective, knowing that just in pure numbers, they're outnumbered in the populace of the country, then it's viewed as a survival for majority. So you have places, including in Ohio, that effectively are swing states if you looked at the populace, but are not swing states in terms of any of their elected officials, because of the way that either districts have been gerrymandered or their voting rules have worked. That's true. That was true in Georgia until Stacey Abrams said, "I'm not going to, put up with that anymore," and took the actions that she did to organize. It's true in Texas. And so it is a problem for Republicans, but unfortunately, they seem to see it as less of a problem as we in the slide towards autocracy. And if you can explain why people support Donald Trump, you're smarter than I am. Because I just don't see, I can see people might say I'm fiscally responsible, even though I can poke holes in the argument of Toomey and so on. I might disagree with them. But because he's not fiscally responsible, or many others. But this is a different level. This is, we want to support an autocratic rule. Do anything you want as long as it's what Trump and the people surrounding him have said. And that doesn't seem to be a threat to Republicans.
Yeah. Phyllis asked, let's see, where's it? She said when, this is in Pennsylvania, when her synagogue is doing deeper relational organizing, we thought it was too hard to be nonpartisan and felt that not appropriate for us because, of course, there's this issue about houses of worship and partisanship. How can we do it with religious organizations? Yeah,
So I'd say two things.
So partisan, everything is.
So I'd say two things about that. We're a 501c3 as well. What we cannot do is tell somebody who they can vote for. We can't actually go and say Republicans are bad, you should never vote for them. We can't say you should not vote for Mr. Toomey. Fine. You can still do deep organizing to get people to go vote without telling them who to vote for. The other thing I'd say about it is I find it, I don't know if surprising or maybe it's symptomatic that organization like ours, organizations like your synagogues, are very cautious about this point. And many evangelical megachurches are standing in the pulpit saying, voting, if you vote for a Democrat, you'll go to hell. Almost verbatim. And so I don't understand why only one side has to follow the rules.
Would you say it's similar to how scientists felt?
No, I think scientists was self-imposed. There was a narrative which I really think comes from the religious background that science grew out of, which was certainly the monasteries and religious communities, that said you should hold yourself apart from the world to do science, and otherwise you will be biased in the science that you do, which I happen to think is a nonsense argument, but that's still held to. I mean, maybe that was true in the 14th century, but I'm less concerned about it now. And nobody holds themselves apart. And yes, we are subjective in some of the choices we make. It doesn't mean you do worse science just because you choose what problems to work on. So
Mhm.
it's different from that, I believe.
Yeah.
in any
Elliot
case.
Rabin is asking, how much help will we get from lawyers such as Mark Elias, who opposes all of this voter suppression laws?
Well, I mean, they will be effective on a case-by-case basis, but the laws are, first of all, the people who are pushing the voter suppression laws, who are the same people who push, anti-climate bills and, things that would say that you shouldn't have, you shouldn't allow solar panels on houses in the Sunshine State. That's an extremely well-funded network. Most of the bills, voter suppression bills, you can trace them back to the American Legislative Exchange Council, the Koch brothers, the Mercers, and others. So Elias, I think, is doing really good work, but is essentially struggling to keep up with just this tsunami of challenges. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it's a very different, you have to go state by state. That's what we're doing in a few redistricting issues. We're not the litigants, but we're helping find plaintiffs who can work with the law firms that are challenging gerrymandered districting. And it's important to be involved in those efforts, but it's always a very slow process in the courts.
Let me take one. Yeah, I was going to say your work with voters rejected ballots is so voter by voter. It's so labor intensive. It's intense. It's incredible.
It is, but I mean, if you're working with community groups, they have the ability to, these are people in their church congregations or their synagogue congregations or in a mosque,
right,
or in any other kind of temple. And so, it's many hands make lighter work.
Yes. Maury, let me give you the last question. And
thank you. And thank you, Dr. Rosenberg, for pointing out that the only thing left to do at this point is the hands-on work that you are beginning to talk about. And there are organizations already set up. You mentioned one, the Fair Fight Action, founded by Stacey Abrams. Another group that I've been making calls with is the Center for Common Ground. Now, they're all set up. They have the whole machinery in place. They have scripts. They have voter registration lists. And of course, it's work. I mean, if you volunteer to do that, you get on the phone and you call one after another. People don't pick up the phone. They have a script for the voicemail, and you're telling them how to vote specifically in relation to the restrictive laws. The example you gave about how your ID has to match your old ID, well, they put that right into the script. Make sure you have your social security number and your driver's license and your photo. They just tell people right up front. And, hopefully enough people get that information, but that is what there is left to do. And, if any of you listening have any time to do this work, it's going to pick up again as we get closer to the next election. So that's what there's left to do. And it's definitely worth doing. Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Maury, for that call out on what to do.
And let me just add to that in many cases, it's not the door-to-door or even the phone banking. Lots of places need phone banking, and it's not fun or anything like that. But there's a lot of back office stuff that needs to be done too. Like, most of the information that we get, it's all public information. You can call the election officials, and they are required to give you the information about how many ballots they sent out, how many were rejected, how many were returned, how many were rejected, and so on. Putting that in the hands of organizers, which is what election consultants get paid a gazillion dollars to do, is extremely helpful. And so, yes, it is a lot of work, and phone banking is a lot of work, and going door to door is important, but it's most important for people to go door to door in either their own neighborhoods or neighborhoods near them. And because you can say that, yes, I live in the same city. That's why I care about this, as opposed to parachuting in, particularly, again, the point about every 2 years or every 4 years. It's deep organizing and relational organizing because you need to build those relationships so you can stand and talk to people, not just be viewed as somebody dropping a leaflet.
Or as we used to call outside agitators, used to be called, I guess.
Yes, well, being an outside agitator isn't always bad either, but
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Rosenberg. And it was good to meet you, and please keep up the good work. And I know that many of us are active members of the union, and even though we might not be scientists, but
you don't need to be a scientist. And there's a lot of resources on our website, including
yeah,
how you can get involved in training for different kinds of activities,
right.
including pushing back on disinformation campaigns and the like. So I encourage you to go to the
Oh,
website
that's
for that.
great. That's great. And Muriel also put a direct link to our action alert on voting. So look for that in the chat as well. And of course, you can find it on our website. So thank you all very much. And I want to call, I see that Joanna from Atlanta is here. And she wants to, wanted her to just tell us a little bit. She had a meeting before, but I wanted to tell her a little bit about her congressional meeting and how that went. So Joanna, you're unmuted.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much. Apologies for being late. I had a synagogue board meeting and it's still going. Anyway, so I'm from Atlanta. I'm the community organizer for the Jewish community with Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. And we had 2 lobby meetings last week, one with a staff member from Senator Warnock's office, one with Senator Ossoff's. And it was as smooth could be. We had the script that Mirala provided us, Jewish Earth Alliance. So we had the talking points that we wanted to cover, and we assigned talking parts to 3 people. So basically, I sent an email out to our little network. So we have a group called the Jewish Climate Action Network of Georgia. And we actually had a rabbi, the head of our Atlanta Rabbinical Association, open with a prayer. And we went through our 3 priority areas. And because people had a week to prepare, they could certainly read their sentences. So it didn't seem super, unnatural to read it. And people added their own personal comments, which was actually really beautiful, and it felt very meaningful. But it was really well received because the staff members that we spoke with knew we were calling them. So it sort of forced them to be prepared to talk about the priority areas. So it meant that they had to already know where our senators stand on these issues. And we asked them, we want to thank Senator Ossoff for co-sponsoring the Recovery Wildlife Bill, whatever the proper name is, but what more can we do? And so it was really a nice dialogue where we felt very empowered. We could say, we know the support, but what else can we do? And then for Senator Warnock, what can we do to help Senator Warnock co-sponsor? Basically, putting some pressure on him. And I think everyone felt very comfortable and confident, and it was really great. I think it's also super important to mention that we partnered with Moms Clean Air Force here in Georgia and with the Sierra Club chapter of Georgia. So the benefit is that those groups have strong connections with the respective senator offices. So they knew who to ask for a meeting. They got that meeting scheduled, and they also helped moderate the call. So we stayed on time. They took minutes. So it just made everything a little bit more organized. So that was really helpful.
Right. Yeah. Doing some prep work really makes a big difference. Yeah. And also just saying at the end, what do you want us to do? What can we do?
Yeah.
You?
Yeah.
I love it. Our reception has been just really great. Our name recognition recognition, even it's surprising for how small we are. And
Yeah.
so it's great. Thank you, Joanna, for letting us know what happened in Atlanta.
Yes. Pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. What do they say? 90% of it is showing up, and the other 10% is writing those letters and getting meetings with your members of Congress. And I want to just quote my favorite quote from the Megillat Esther, which I never made really the connection that Megillah comes from the word to reveal and Esther comes from the word to conceal. So the whole story is about the balance of revealing and concealing. And just as we're taking off our masks, we're supposed to put on a mask at Purim. So it's kind of a strange time we're in. But the piece that just really keeps coming back to me is Umi Yodea, Im le'et kazot higaat lemalchut. If you keep silent in this crisis, this is what Mordechai says to Esther. If you keep silent in this crisis, and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, mi yodea, perhaps for this very moment of crisis, you have attained to royal position. So we have been born at this time. Mi yodea, who knows why we were born at this time, but obviously we can feel that it's to do this work. So along with our mission and our destiny in this life, we're also given free will, and it gives us the choice to say we're going to do it or we're not going to do it. And you have all shown up to say you're going to do it, and we really appreciate that chutzpah in large and small ways. So let me bless you as you go along your way. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'irdof tzedek. Blessings to you, and to you with a capital Y, and you all, y'all, for raising us up as you pursue tzedek, righteousness, the right things to do for creation and for our beloved planet. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Enjoy the added, where am I? Let's see, I'm in California, so it hasn't sun has, they passed that bill, huh? The sun hasn't set. They're going to try to keep daylight savings time. So enjoy these later evenings and sunsets, and we'll see you.
Happy Purim.
Happy Purim. Yeah, happy Purim to everybody. We'll see you next month.